you, Nketu, for the kind word that you have said about me. And I want to thank the leadership for having invited me. Nketu will always tell me about his experience with your groups. Every time he comes back, he would say, we've been talking about the context of Jesus. Every time we would speak, then he would say, the context of Jesus. He would say, let's put it in the context of Jesus. So I began to be really interested. What does he mean? So before I could come myself, I was invited. So I'm so glad that I'm here today. Thank you, Ruwan, for inviting me, and thank you, leadership. I have been a pastor for almost half of my life. Let me put it that way. I have been preaching since I was 20. So I have really never been in a situation like this. He told me yesterday in Ketu that you are going to meet business leaders and some pastors. I said, wow. So it has been a reality for me because I've really never spoken to business leaders. So I'm going to try today. It's my first time, believe you me. But I have spoken mainly in leaders. I've been involved in developing church leaders. So you will forgive me if I start reading the Bible. Not that you don't go to church, but I feel comfortable to start from that end. My theme today is begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. There is a saying in Zulu. It goes something like this. Uma u kala kahle, uzoqhubeka kahle, uzoqeda kahle. I'm not Zulu, but at least I do understand what it means. This saying in Zulu is very close to a play by William Shakespeare. The play is All's Well that Ends Well. All is well that ends well. Apparently, this was a proverb during Shakespeare's time before it became a play. And it has, at least it was used, these words were used for over 400 years. So may all of us say something like this in our hearts. I want to finish well. I want to finish well. One of the generals in the USA called MacArthur says something like this when he was asked to come and make a farewell speech. He said, I'm closing my 52 years of military service. When I joined the army, even before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plain at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished. But I still remember, this is what MacArthur said, the refrain of one of the most popular ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that, oh, the soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. Then he said, bye-bye. My idea of let's start with the end in mind is basically based on a little bit of experience that I have since I was a pastor and since I have raised leaders myself by accident. And since I have been having struggles in leadership personally, in terms of understanding what leadership is all about. In fact, I have concluded in my heart that leadership is Christian only when we participate for the redemption of people. Leadership is Christians when we participate in the purposes of Jesus. Hence, that's why I enjoy it when Matima told me in the context of Jesus. I want to make a little bit transition. Or maybe let me put these questions to you as we're talking about having in mind the end. What happened to some of the leaders that we know? What happened to them? What happened to some pastors that we know? What happened to Bible school teachers that you know, some of them? What about administrators that we know? What happened to them? What about supervisors that we know? What about business leaders that we know? What happened to them? What was their final goodbye? Let me make a transition. You know, the Bible mentions over 1,000 leaders. Over 1,000 leaders. And some, not much data do we receive from the Bible about them. For example, David had two prophets. One was Nathan. Do you remember the guy who confronted David after the sin with Bathsheba? But we don't hear much about him. And he also had another minister called Gad. We don't hear much about them. But they were leaders of their time. So the Bible has so many leaders. They are civic leaders. They were religious leaders. They were business leaders. We don't hear much about them. I'm going to read some names for you. Abraham, we hear much about him. We hear much about Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Nehemiah. These are people that were leaders. And yet there were other leaders, not much is known about them. There's a man called Robert Clinton. He wrote a book called The Making of a Leader. Robert Clinton took upon himself to study the lives of this 49, let me say this 1,000 people, but he only studied 49 of them. By the way, I'm just reminding you, I'm trying to talk up to you about having the end in mind. So Robert Clinton took upon himself to study these 1,000 people, and he was only able to study 49. So he identified several categories as he studied these 49 biblical leaders. Here are the categories. Some were cut off early in their leadership. Some finished poorly in their leadership. Some finished so and so. And some finished well. I told the church some few weeks ago, I prayed that, oh God, I've been in this church for more than 40 years. Help me to finish well. And some we can't be sure. Let me talk briefly about those who were cut early. Cut off early means they were taken out of leadership early. Because I'm talking about the Bible, some were assassinated, some were killed in battle, some were overthrown, some were supposed to be removed. Samson is an example of a leader who abused his gift of leadership. Absalom was a leader. He was cut off early. Ahab was a leader. And he was cut off early. Basically, most of them could not go longer because of their poor leadership. They never had an end in mind. Let me talk about those who finished poorly. Finished poorly means they were going downhill in the latter part of their ministry. This might mean in terms of their personal relationship with God or in terms of their competency. Gideon is an example. I've already mentioned Samson. The old man, Eli, is an example of those people who finished poorly. Saul is a classical example. What about Solomon? He started very well, but he ended poorly. You know, Solomon had so many wives. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines. And he finished poorly, even though he started well. Well, Clinton, other categories, two of them, finished so and so means that they did not do what they potentially could have done. They did not complete what God had for them to do. So it's like finished, well, he's finished, he's done, but so and so. But there are people who finish very, very well. And well, at church, we're still studying these people. But I'm sure even if you are business leaders, you can sometimes look at the lives of these people. Abraham, Job, Joseph, Joshua, Caleb, Samuel, Daniel. Daniel was still able to read the Bible at 70. He picked up, when you look at Daniel chapter 9, he picked up that the prophet Jeremiah prophesied earlier that they're going to return and go back to Jerusalem. Remember that they were in Babylon as exiles. He was one of those young people who served under 3 kings while he was in Babylon. Now when he was over, when he was 70 years, he picked up that, hey, God said that we're going to go home. He began to pray and prayed for his nation at the age of 70. He finished well. What about Paul? It is said that when Paul was over 50, he wrote the book of Corinthians. And he was able to say to Timothy, Timothy, when you come visit me, bring along my books. Because he still wanted to study further. Are we still together? I nearly said, can you say amen to that? Let me quickly run through 6 other points. Barriers to finishing well. Here are the barriers. Number 1, or maybe let me quote the verse. Proverbs 22:3 says, sensible people will see trouble coming and avoid it. But an unthinking person will walk right into it and regret it later. Proverbs 22, verse number 3. Let me run quickly over the barriers to finishing well. Barrier number 1, finances. People who cannot finish well abuse finances. Leaders, especially those in power of position, those who are supposed to make important decisions concerning finances, they tend to use practices which may encourage wrongdoing. A character trait of greed often is rooted deep and eventually will cause impropriety with regards to finances. The abuse of finances. A great example in the New Testament is Ananias and Sapphira. You remember that because of greed, they were asked, is it all the money that you brought before the apostles? And they said, yes. But they knew that it was not true. They had saved some for themselves. Barrier number 1, finances. Abuse of finances. Barrier number 2, power. Abuse of power. Leaders who are effective in ministry must use various power bases in order to accomplish their ministry. But with so much power given to us, sometimes it gets abused. Since I was a pastor, or since I'm now a pastor, I've been a pastor for several years. Matima them and others, when they see me carrying my Bible, they will come quickly and grab it for me, and they want me to walk in their midst. I go out there as a pope, which sometimes I don't appreciate. But they do that. And sometimes a man can be so much deceived by these powers that you can abuse it to your detriment because of the position that you find yourself in. People who are put in power and they are unable to see that power is given for service, not necessarily for controlling the minds of people. I think we need to have balance here. We need to be accountable to someone who can always check us. Barrier number 3, pride, which leads to downfall. We must have a healthy respect for ourselves and for the people that we are working with. I used to work when I was still a boy. I remember this manager at OK Bazaars. I used to work there when school was out. I used to work in OK Bazaar many years ago. I think I was around 18, 19. So there was this manager who was so calm. When he was supposed to be on top of us, he would be calm. And one day I was arguing. I'm talking about something probably over 50 years ago. I was arguing with a colleague at work. And I felt I was right. So the manager came and called me to his office. Then he said to me, "What's wrong?" So I told him, and I was still furious, and I thought I was right. Then he said to me, "Amos, tell me, after he said that to you, was there any piece of your flesh that fall off from you?" I said, "No." Then he said, "What's your problem? You can continue remaining the same Amos, even if somebody said something nasty about you. You must have a healthy respect for yourself and for others. Remember that you are working with people. You don't need to be puffed up, because pride is the beginning of falling down. Barrier number 4, sex, illicit relationships, has been a major downfall of leaders in the Bible, and in fact, in our culture as well. And I don't have to go to David. You remember the sin of David. And unfortunately, some of these barriers, especially this one of illicit sexual relationships, sometimes the scar don't just go away easily. The results are so painful at times because perhaps somebody never saw the end. He was enjoying the moment. Let me not talk about this. I think it's enough to say illicit sexual relationships can be dangerous for leaders. It's not good for leaders, not good for church leaders, not good for business people. It's not good for people who are in position of influence. Leaders are people of influence. So illicit relationships are not good for people of influence. Remember what happened to David's family. It was destroyed. And he himself had a hard time after this sin. Barrier number 5 to finishing well, family. Sometimes problem between spouses or between parents and children or between siblings can destroy a leader's leadership. And hence, as leaders, I would suggest that we put this in prayer as a matter of prayer. You have somehow to work together with your spouse, with your children, and develop a healthy relationship with them. The last is plateauing. It's also a barrier. In which sense? Sometimes leaders want to remain in their position of leadership even though they are plateauing. They are no longer competent. They are like skeletons. We always speak about what I used to do before. They told me people who speak about what they used to do before, they're almost dying. So leaders need to be so cautious. In fact, because we are talking about having the end in mind, I think during our leadership, we need to train other leaders. Okay, quickly, now I'm finishing. 5 things to enhance good finishes. 1, we need to have a perspective. Leadership is all about perspective. Leadership is not like you are put in a position and you are left there. But leadership it's how you respond to God's challenges. Because God will always challenge you to be obedient, will always challenge your integrity, will always challenge you with events, will always challenge you with other people to enhance your leadership. Another pastor friend of mine used to say, every level of leadership has its own demons. And God knew before he brought to the next level that you're going to meet new demons of that level. If you could not win the previous level, how can you win the next level? Leadership has to be perceived from that angle. We look at present ministry of leadership as a lifetime thing. God forms you, forms me over lifetime. God is in the business of forming. Because truly speaking, leadership flows from being, not from how much you have learned at school. But it flows from what God has done in your life and how you have been responding. Number 2, leadership is better when we are renewed. Special moments with intimacy with God. Times when God gives you a new vision. Affirmation from God. These are very important. So we can't do away with intimacy with God. Disciplines, spiritual disciplines, these are very helpful for us as leaders. There's a man, actually he's a pastor, Dallas Williams, and Richard Foster. Richard Foster wrote a book about spiritual disciplines. Disciplines of listening, disciplines of silence, disciplines of fasting, disciplines of service, disciplines of prayer. These are important and they enhance our leadership. Learning posture. Leaders must always learn. Are you still with me? Leaders must always learn. You can't say you know it all. I told you about Daniel when he was over 70, he was still learning. He was still reading the Bible. Leadership will be enhanced when we agree to have mentors. Somebody who has been there before us. What do you think of that? Somebody who knows the way, who has been there for us. I I take Matima them. And because we call ourselves from the old school, so sometimes we don't know what's happening currently. So I would take Matima them and some other young pastors, and I would sit around with them, and I learned from them. They tell, oh, Pastor, this is not how it's being done today. They don't know. They are my mentors. They help me. They give me a new perspective. So a leader must continue to learn. Let's have the end in mind. The end in mind. It can be done. If God did it through Daniel, if God helped Paul to see the end in mind, so much that at the end of his life, he said, I have run a good race. I fought a good fight. Now I'm ready to be released. It can be done. May God bless you.